Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Corombos of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
So glad you're with us for the Monday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. Jim Garrity still away, and here in his place today, happy to have Inez Stepman. She is with the Independent Women's Forum, The Federalist. She's a Lincoln Fellow at the Claremont Institute and host of the High Noon podcast. And Inez, always good to have you with us. Thanks for your time today.
It's always great to be here, Greg. Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, let's start with the good news. We actually have some today, which we're always happy about. And it was just a couple of weeks ago that we got kind of the bombshell that those changes the Biden administration made early last year, allowing people to apply for asylum and other things from their home country, actually resulted in the United States flying in at least 320,000 people, virtually all of whom had no legal justification for being in the country, to 43 different airports around the nation. Now, Biden's numbers, of course, on the immigration front, despite how much he tries to twist the narrative now with the fact that Republicans won't get behind the Senate bill, he's not popular on immigration. And now a new poll from Rasmussen shows that well over half of voters also don't like these flights. The latest Rasmussen Reports national telephone and online survey finds that 60% of likely U.S. voters disapprove of the program of international flights that last year transported more than 300,000 illegal immigrants to the United States, including 46% who strongly disapprove. So, and as people can see the reality with their own eyes, they can see what reports they can find about what's happening at the border. Folks who live in cities where the illegals are being brought, where you are in New York City and other places around the country, can see the reality, despite what the media might be telling them. And now finding out that not only is the border a complete sieve, but they're actively flying hundreds of thousands of people into this country who shouldn't be here is quite something. So good that the American people recognize that this is a horrible idea. Obviously not great that it's happening in the first place.
Yeah, a few points on this. First, obviously, they're not releasing the names of the airports because they don't want to be responsible to the people in those locations who are likely seeing these migrants and the impact that they're having on their communities. They don't want the situation in which one of these migrants inevitably commits a crime, and then it's traced back literally to the government, our own government, flying these people in and just dropping them off, with a court date some 3 or 5 years hence around the country. So that I think they're trying to avoid that level of Willie Horton version of the migrant crisis, which is why they're not releasing it, of course. The second thing, this is consistently in poll after poll, this is one of Biden's weakest issues. It's one of Democrats' weakest issues, exactly because the crisis is now has gone partially because of one of the most clever political, stunts I've ever seen in my sort of time following politics, of sending migrants to big blue cities. But now, independently, we don't, in New York City, we don't need Governor DeSantis or Governor Abbott to be busing migrants to New York City anymore. People are showing up at the border and saying Roosevelt Hotel, because they know they're going to be put up in Manhattan for free. So it's self-perpetuating now. But the fact that this crisis has spread beyond the border states that have been dealing with this level of crisis, for decades, and being called racist for their trouble if they complained about it, to some extent by both parties. So, the fact that it's now nationwide, I think, is what's really driving these numbers. People are really interacting with it in the same way that people in Hidalgo, Texas, have been interacting with it for decades. And then finally, you mentioned it yourself, this really frustrating fig leaf that the establishment of the Republican Party handed to Joe Biden on this issue by not knowing their own conference and their own base, so much so that they negotiated a bill that was DOA with most of their own members, right? It was just such an own goal, and it handed the Biden administration such a political fig leaf, which he used in the State of the Union and uses consistently to try to turn this crisis around and blame it on Republicans when it is very clearly created and orchestrated and sometimes directly encouraged by the Biden administration. This is just another example of political malpractice by Republicans.
Yeah, it is. And you have to be ready for the Democrats and the media to take that narrative, because the Republicans did pass a pretty decent border security bill out of the House, but it was immediately deemed dead by Chuck Schumer. and the media just went along with that. There's no, my goodness, the Democrats had a chance to secure the border and they're derelict in their duties. There was no narrative like that whatsoever. But you get one Republican in the Senate who negotiates a bill with Chris Murphy and Kirsten Sinema, and all of a sudden, if the whole party doesn't go along with that, then they're the ones that aren't serious about border security. You got to be ready for that. It's totally unfair, but you know it's coming.
Yeah, definitely, which is why, again, the least we should be able to expect from our party leadership is a kind of competence about their own members, right? Forget about their duty to the base of the people who actually vote them into office. The least we can expect of kind of DC swamp creatures should be that they actually know their own caucuses, they know their own members, they know what votes they're going to, who's going to be able, what kind of things they're going to be able to pass in their own caucuses. That's basic political competence. And in this case, their disconnection from the base and their disconnection from the voters led to an embarrassing disconnection even from the people that they're supposed to know, their colleagues, right? And it's largely because they haven't allowed conservatives, they basically didn't allow conservatives to sit in on the negotiation of this bill. And then they were surprised, right, that they couldn't ram it down. They didn't take input. I don't know. It just, I know that Mitch McConnell is now moving on, is retiring. I wonder how much that has to do with the fact that it showed how, if there was one positive thing about Mitch McConnell, it was supposed to be that he was good at getting things that he wanted to pass. And in this case, the gap between what he imagined was a good idea and was like a good Republican bill, and not only the base, forget about the base, that never enters into Mitch McConnell's mind, but he couldn't even be enough in touch with his colleagues in the House to understand that this was never going to pass. This was like completely DOA. And in doing so, he really did hand an enormous political fig leaf to Biden, which, as you say, we can expect. The media, of course, the media is running with us. Of course, I mean, that's all completely predictable. But once again, this is kind of an own goal. I think we could be much stronger on this issue. Republicans could be much stronger on this issue, but they gave it away. Or rather, I should say, our leadership in the establishment Republican Party gave away this issue in a really destructive way politically. But hopefully that won't matter. I mean, these polls are still very strong against the Biden administration. So hopefully people still understand this is not because the Republicans didn't vote for a terrible border. Right. The Biden administration is perfectly capable of controlling this. They have all the power they need to control the flood at the border. And the evidence we have for that is what the problem was still there, but it was getting better under the Trump administration, and it's exploded under Biden.
No question about that. The numbers are irrefutable if the media is being honest about them, which they might not be, but the facts, the public understands the facts. But speaking of media dishonesty, just stay tuned. We've got a real doozy for you coming up next. In the meantime, 4Patriots is where you want to go for some fantastic deals on being ready when your power goes out and when other crises might arise. Go to 4patriots.com/martini. The great deal going on right now, of course, is the free solar panel with the purchase of the Patriot Power Generator 2000X. And of course, as always, you get free shipping on orders more than $97. The Patriot Power Generator, when your power goes out, you're going to be really glad you have it, because while other folks are waiting for the power company to get the juice back on, you are going to be having a functioning fridge, freezer, medical devices, and a whole lot more. It comes with 12 outlets, including 4 AC, plus 2 USB-C outlets that charge your phone 20 times faster than normal. Also, you can take advantage of some deals that are going to be going away soon, so act quickly on the Solar Go fridge, the Sauna Wrap therapeutic blanket, and more. Visit 4patriots.com/martini to get your Patriot Power Generator 2000X with the free solar panel included. Plus, get free shipping on orders over $97. Save more and get peace of mind now by going to the number 4patriots.com/martini. That's 4patriots.com/martini. All right, and as speaking of media malpractice, let's talk about what happened on Saturday night with the Trump rally in Ohio ahead of tomorrow's primary there, and how the media responded to it. Here is the clip that was going around liberal Twitter late Saturday and throughout the day, Sunday, and certainly got factored in to the Sunday morning talk shows. Here is President Trump in Ohio.
If I get elected, now if I don't get elected, it's going to be a bloodbath for the whole... That's going to be the least of it. It's going to be a bloodbath for the country. That'll be the least of it.
And so there you go. It's going to be January 6th on steroids. These people are going to be unleashed across the country, and Trump is promising political violence. Except They didn't include the context at all. And here is what Trump really said.
Mexico has taken over a period of 30 years, 34% of the automobile manufacturing business in our country. Think of it. Went to Mexico. China now is building a couple of massive plants where they're going to build the cars in Mexico and they think that they're going to sell those cars into the United States with no tax at the border. Let me tell you something to China. If you're listening, President Xi, and you and I are friends, but he understands the way I deal, those big monster car manufacturing plants that you're building in Mexico right now, and you think you're going to get that, you're going to not hire Americans, and you're going to sell the cars to us. No, we're going to put a 100% tariff on every single car that comes across the line, and you're not going to be able to sell those cars. If I get elected, now, if I don't get elected, it's going to be a bloodbath for the whole, that's going to be the least of it. It's going to be a bloodbath for the country. That'll be the least of it. But they're not going to sell those cars. They're building massive factories.
And so there you go. There's the context of the quote. And he's saying that perhaps the automotive industry woes are going to be the least of the problems if Biden gets reelected. But of course, the Democrats and the allies in the media went with that first clip, and they were pushing the same narrative through people like Nancy Pelosi on CNN Sunday morning.
He's even predicting a bloodbath. What does that mean? He's going to exact a bloodbath? There's something wrong here. How respectful I am of the American people and their goodness. But how much more do they have to see from him to understand that this isn't what our country is about?
They weren't the only ones. NBC, Trump says there will be a bloodbath if he loses the election. New York Times, Trump says some migrants are not people. He was referring to MS-13 and predicts a bloodbath if he loses in 2024. ABC News, Trump says there'll be a bloodbath if he loses 2024 election. And they even have folks like Brian Schatz, the Democratic senator from Hawaii, who's telling the media what to report. Headline writers, don't outsmart yourself. Just do Trump promises bloodbath if he doesn't win election. And so, I mean, I have often said that Trump is sometimes his own worst enemy with how he phrases things. I don't know if he could have done this one a little bit clearer, but it's obvious that there was media malpractice, the literal definition of media malpractice here, Inez, and how this was reported.
Right. And we're always hearing about disinformation, right? And the dangers of disinformation, and by which they mean things that are now 5 years later, for example, or 4 years later in the case of COVID, things that are being printed in the New York Times, like the fact that there was enormous learning loss that was not comparatively offset by any kind of serious numbers of deaths or serious infections among children for COVID. That was considered disinformation, but they will print, they will print this lie about this bloodbath comments. It's very clear from the context what he's talking about. It's not one of those cases, as I agree with you. Sometimes Trump says things in ways that are very easy to misconstrue. This isn't really, if you listen to the whole clip, it's quite clear and that he's talking the whole entire time he's talking about the auto industry. And once again, this is something that Trump is articulating, a very popular economic policy, one that has distinguished him from much of sort of conservative orthodoxy in a way, right? His willingness to embrace tariffs, here in the longer clip, he threatens to put 100% tariff on any Chinese or Mexican manufactured cars being sold into the United States. These are actually policies that are enormously popular, not just in the Rust Belt, but in other parts of America. They have gotten him his popularity with this new sort of Republican, now voting Republican working class base. And I don't think, I would like to think that this media coverage doesn't matter and it just plays into the same people who are still, their number one concern for the country at this moment in 2024 is January 6th. But I mean, the fact is that the media does matter. And a lot of people will just read these headlines and say, once again, Donald Trump is saying something extreme and scary, and it's simply not true.
Yeah. And if you don't have places like X or other places that give a fair shake to these situations, or don't just write a story based on the short clip that they saw on Twitter, then people are going to have a hard time finding the right context for that. And I don't know how many people are still undecided out there. I think generally if you're pro-Trump. You're not going to let that derail you, even if you didn't get the right context, and vice versa. Even if you do get the right context, but you hate Trump, it's probably not going to change your vote. But I mean, the media is awful in so many ways, but this is one of the more egregious ones in a very long time.
I think you're making a really good point, especially with everything that has come out with the Twitter files and the active collusion and suppression between government agencies and social media companies. Imagine if we didn't have this full clip. The fact that we do have one relatively free speech platform makes a huge difference. That's kind of the scary thing, and why this issue of both of censorship and of the structural power of tech companies generally over how we fact check things, how we see if narratives are true or false, what kind of information that we get. I mean, this is really why we can't avoid a rethink on how much power these companies actually have, how much they're in bed with government agencies, and how much there's a revolving door between the two of them. That is the structure of a quite effective censorship regime, at least for the last 4 years. Again, now we have one platform, X, Twitter, that is outside of that, but almost by accident, right? We can't rely on a, for now, friendly billionaire in Elon Musk to create, the one place where we can see if one of our major presidential candidates actually did say that he was going to create a bloodbath after the election if he lost, right? We have to find a way to deal with this 21st century censorship structure that does preserve our traditional liberties, even if the legal structure is going. I think the Supreme Court is going to be dealing with this for the next 10 years, honestly. This balance of how much do corporations have First Amendment rights to control what's on their platforms versus what is the right of individual people to speak, finding a new balance between those two things. I think probably the Supreme Court is going to be dealing with for the next 10 years. And we'll probably be sitting here again talking in 10 years about these doctrines that have been developed to balance these things. But we are not there yet. Well,
the sooner we get to it with the current complexion of the court, the better, because we don't know what it's going to look like over the next decade. But exactly right, that we should not be relying on one particular platform for us to be able to figure out what the truth is here. But I'm glad we have it. Also, glad to have this, a brand new sponsor called ZBiotics, because, if a story like that makes you want to drink, or maybe you actually have 3 real martinis for lunch, might not be feeling so great the next day. You want to think ahead of time and take ZBiotics. And here's why. ZBiotics is a pre-alcohol probiotic drink that's the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by a PhD scientist to tackle rough mornings after drinking. And so when you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in your gut. And it's this byproduct, not dehydration or anything else, that's to blame for your rough next day. ZBiotics produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. So just remember to take ZBiotics as your first drink of the night, then drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best the next day. So go to zbiotics.com/3ml to get 15% off your first order when you use 3ml at checkout. ZBiotics is backed with 100% money-back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they will refund your money, no questions asked. Visit zbiotics.com/3ml and use the code 3ml at checkout for 15% off. Thank you, ZBiotics, for sponsoring this episode and our good times. All right, and as onto our crazy martini now. And of course, we've talked a lot on this podcast about Joe Biden, his lousy performance as president, the fact that he's not fit to be president in a number of different ways, cognitively being one of them. But there's also the problem of Kamala Harris, because if everything was true about Joe Biden, but Kamala Harris had proved herself to be a competent and likable vice president, the Democrats would probably just move on, but they're not going to. And so columnist Kathleen Parker for the Washington Post asking Kamala Harris actually to leave the ticket. That way Biden could replace her with someone more popular, and therefore people would feel better about voting for the ticket, because if he couldn't finish his term, somebody they like better than Kamala would be then ready to step up and take the job. She's not going to do that, of course, but Parker says this: the Kamala conundrum comes down to this. She was picked because she was black and female, a combo tantamount to job security. Now that she has become a burden to the Democratic ticket, Biden can't fire her. He can't risk alienating his base. Full stop. The seriousness of this situation can't be overstated. Biden's diminishing faculties, notwithstanding his relatively successful State of the Union address, and his increasing physical frailty are concerning. Her performance as second in command has been disappointing to say the least. Americans have taken note. Though Democrats unsurprisingly like her more than Republicans do, a recent analysis by 538 set her average overall approval rating at just 37.2%, among the lowest recorded for a vice president. There's no reason to think her ranking would spike if she were suddenly promoted to the Oval Office. Instead, most signs point to disaster. This is why I propose, with all due respect, that Harris step away from the ticket. And of course, the reaction on social media, the Washington Post comment section, it's got nothing to do with Kamala Harris, looking like a lightweight on the world stage, her word salad commentary, her inexplicable giggling, her intense random fascination with Venn diagrams. No, it's of course all about blatant racism, misogyny. Shame on you. Your true colors are showing. This is racism. Why did you publish this? Like most Republican women, Kathleen Parker hates women and the rights of women. I think calling her a Republican at this point is a little bit generous anyway, but racist, disgusting piece of, all sorts of stuff here. So Inez, of course, this was going to happen because they can't deal with the merits of the argument. But what do you make of the, I guess, pretty expected backlash here from the left?
I think it's all kind of beautiful because it is beyond obvious that, the Democratic Party rejected Kamala Harris, right? This was very obvious on the debate stage. I covered the debates for the Democratic primary, and it was obvious that she was essentially like good on paper for their checkboxes of being Black and female and for essentially nothing else. And Democratic voters immediately sized that up. And she was expected to be like a real contender. She very quickly dropped into fourth and fifth and was like falling off the map very quickly. So this is something that was known at the time, but because they were so dedicated to this ideology that really privileges sex and race above everything else and is really like a quota system, right? That Biden announced he has to pick, right? A Black female, basically. So that's how they ended up with Kamala Harris. And there's something really beautiful about this politically, because actually it could be really convenient for the Democrats. They have a very old, very unpopular president. And if they had somebody who was actually dynamic, and even, somebody who you and I would still find scary because of the policies they wanted to enact. But, if they had someone who was at least competent and somewhat charismatic, this would be the best possible political situation for them, right? Because they would be able to get out from the stigma of the Biden administration and the failures of the Biden administration, introduce a fresh face in a race where there's considerable polling that there's a lot of people who are fed up with both sides, with these two octogenarians. They would be in a much better political position. But because they're so dedicated to this ideology of picking people on the basis of their race and sex, they are stuck with Kamala Harris. And it's a problem instead of a boon for them to be able to get out from some of the political deadweight of the Biden administration. So, I think this is all kind of funny and beautiful. And I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying this kind of fight because that's what happens when you don't pick on merit, right? Unfortunately, we all have to live under the consequences of every institution in American life not choosing on merit and instead choosing on racial characteristics, on sex characteristics, right, and on ideological characteristics. We all have to deal with those consequences, from government agencies to Fortune 500s, companies to Boeing. So that part is not so funny and not so beautiful, but at least the Democrats are suffering from their own inability to put competence ahead of racial characteristics.
Exactly. Yeah, she made a splash in one debate, basically by calling Joe Biden a racist, and then Tulsi Gabbard,
that was her one claim to fame,
knocked her out over her hypocrisy on marijuana laws and so forth. So, Inez, thanks as always for filling in. We look forward to having you a couple times next week, so we'll talk then.
Great. Looking forward to it, Greg.
Thanks. Inez Stepman with the Independent Women's Forum, also with the Federalist. She's a Lincoln Fellow at the Claremont Institute, and she's host of the High Noon podcast. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Follow all of us on Twitter. Inez is at Inez Felcher. Jim, of course, is at Jim Garrity. I'm at Dateline_DC. Please subscribe to the 3 Martini Lunch podcast. If you don't already, please give us a 5-star rating and a kind review. Those always help. And you can get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Have a great Monday, and please join us again on Tuesday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.